Hello, buddy. It's Wyvern here with another episode of Fixing the Forgotten, where we discuss the underwhelming, underpowered, underperforming, or undesired and underutilized units, lords, heroes, and regiments around of a given faction, and what could be done to make them more appealing or more competitive in multiplayer. Now, this is going to be our final faction video. We are going to be covering the Empire this time around. However, there will still be one more covering the various cross-faction units in an upcoming episode. So this is not going to be the last Fixing the Forgotten video, but the last unique faction video. And the Empire is, well, a faction that's in an interesting spot. When I was making this list, I was surprised by how many units I came up with. Empire is a very competitive faction right now, arguably the strongest in the game. Certainly one of the top-tiered factions right now, due to a few different factors going in their favor, most notably their versatility, which has always been a bit of a strength, always kept the Empire in a competitive state, essentially always ensured. Once the gun line of sight bug was fixed, the Empire was basically always in a competitive state. But recently, with the Outriders rate of fire buff finally, or rate of fire finally being fixed, with the fact that the Empire got some nasty new tools in the form of Marcus Wolfheart and the Black Lions, and all these changes, of course, Lord of Death coming in, Empire's become really a top-tier faction. However, there are still some units I think underperform, and some lords that are kind of egregiously crappy, and so we're going to discuss those today and see what can be done to fix them. Now, first and foremost is the Huntsman General. Now, this guy, I know some people are immediately going to scream about his quote-unquote OP combo of Oil Flask, Hail of Fire, and Arrow of Akshay, but quite frankly, this guy is bad. If you're going to bring a ranged lord for something that's not memes, it's going to be Wolfheart. You're not going to bring this guy. Wolfheart is, granted, this guy is dirt cheap. He's like 1,400 with full kit. But simple fact of the matter is, if you want a shooting lord, you are going to bring Wolfheart. Wolfheart is slightly more expensive, has much better kit. His magic missiles, both of them, are still stronger, despite the fact that he's took a heavy-handed nerf from the nerf hammer. He's got AP projectiles, much better combat stats. He's got, of course, a net, which is very, very potent, and better bonus versus large, though granted his damage per shot is not necessarily as high as the Huntsman's. The fact that it's AP and he has a bigger bonus versus large compensates for that in large part. And just all in all, if you're going to bring a range, like I said, if you're going to bring a range hero, you're going to bring Marcus Wolfheart. And if you're looking to do just about anything else, bring a cheap lord, you got better options to go cheap. Much better options. Balthazar Gelt being the most significant there, but even Boris Todbringer or a Archlector are both competitive picks. You bring Boris on a Griffin, that's expensive, but you can bring Boris on a horse sometimes, and he's dirt cheap and still provides a strong debuff aura, still provides, he still has regen and is an absolute tank. You bring an Archlector with amazing area of effect buffs, as well as the area of effect damage of Soulfire, which arguably overtuned, hopefully will be nerfed in the upcoming patches, but nonetheless, if you want a cheap lord, you're not going to bring a Huntsman General. So what can be done to fix him? Well, he could just become cheaper. Like, his abilities are just not that good. Hail of Fire, in my opinion, could use a buff in much the same vein as other reload skill AoEs. 40 meters is just not enough. It encourages clumping. Reality is, if you're against any competitive player, they're going to wreck a shooting line that's lobbed up. So all these reload skill buffs that always look really strong, and this is not unique to the Huntsman General. You see this on Lithanar, you see this on even of course, the Wood Elf Lords, who, granted, they don't do AoE reload buffs, but they do damage buffs. You see this on, of course, the Dwarf Engineers. Factions like that. These effects are usually not worth it, because having to blob your archery is just stupid. It only kind of works for, like, Khalida, because with Tomb Kings, you've got monstrous shooting units, which are safer to blob. But, yeah, Hail of Fire just doesn't really work out. Arrow of Akshay tends to do kind of crappy damage in my experience. I've never seen it perform super well or do significant amounts of damage. Oil Flask is potentially very strong, 50% flame weakness and reduced speed on contact. The problem is it's a 70-meter magic missile, which is incredibly difficult to land. Getting that benefit of the fire damage is incredibly difficult, because you're forced to blob or try to use a Flame Sword of Ruin, which once again forces blobbing, to try to gain that extra fire damage. So that's very difficult, and in a practical game situation, that's not really applicable. Crown of Command, not a bad ability, but really it's not good enough to warrant bringing a general for it. And Glittering Scales, nice melee attack debuff aura, but it's on a ranged lord who's not going to be near your front line most likely. So who cares? And if your opponent's in your backline, -5 melee attack is not going to save your guns or your crossbows. So really, what I think the Arrow of Akshay could use a slight buff to damage. I do think the Oil Flask could use a improvement to range. I think 70-meter range is too low. I think 100 meters would be fair. Still allow good enough counterplay while allowing this missile to be a little more consistent. I do think Hail of Fire, and this is not unique to the Huntsman General. This is something that just needs to cross all borders. As for reload skills, I think this needs to be a bigger area. Possibly even map-wide with reduced effects, of course. I really just do not like... I would say like 55 meters, 75 meters maybe even, like a significant area so that you can actually impact multiple range units at once and not simply be restricted. But I think those would be my suggestions here if you want him to be a cheap range support lord. Otherwise, he just needs to go down in cost. It's not something I'm really hugely fond of recommending, but the guy is kind of crap for what you pay, in my opinion. He's not a caster. He's not a great combatant. His range damage is okay, but you really want to pay for that when you have much better lords to pay for. His buffs are just not worthwhile, and neither are his debuffs really when compared to other options. And really, it's 70-meter magic missiles. I think a lot of people overestimate how powerful these are. Like, Throg's Copious Vomit, for example, is often worthless because you're just never going to get it off. You're certainly not getting off more than one. Hell, the Hydra's Breath attack, which is a really strong breath, is so often it goes unused because it's just not viable past the opening breath, and getting a good breath with those weapons is tough. So, in my opinion, short-range projectiles or of any sort are just bad and tend to struggle. And in my opinion, the Oil Flask, if you want to nerf the fire weakness on it, sure, go ahead, drop it to like 25% or whatever, but make it a projectile that tends to hit more and make it a projectile that can be cast from further away. So, Huntsman General, that's really my recommendations there. I don't think anything else would necessarily make him super competitive. Without overhauling him entirely, but that's not what we're trying to do here necessarily. We're going to keep the spirit of the character, I think, if possible. Next up, we do have the Empire General, and this guy is just dog crap. Like, there's nothing good for me to say about him. He sucks. He's supposed to be the budget fighty lord for the Empire, but if you're going to bring a budget fighty lord, you're going to bring Boris, who's got better combat stats. He's got built-in regen, which allows you to try a more versatile array of wizards. He's got really solid area of effect debuffs, and those are just much more valuable than what the General brings of the Empire brings. So if we look at here, we've got one on foot, one on Griffin back. Keep in mind the one on the General is cheap. On foot, he's 1100 maxed out. On Griffin, he is 2000. So not the most expensive lord in the game by any means. However, HP, not the most amazing. Those combat stats on the Griffin are trash. 30 melee defense is terrible. 47 melee attack is nothing to write home about. Sure, you've got AP and charge bonus. That's nice. But you're almost forced to bring a healer with him. So that really restricts your magic options. Unlike Carl, your alpha's okay with the Rune Fang, but your chances to hit are not that good in sustained combat. Carl has a much higher melee attack, which allows him to hit much more consistently past his opening charge, which is really not the case for the General of the Empire, who once his charge bonus expires, or really even midway through his charge bonus, he's already no longer hitting very consistently. He does get Blood Roar, which is nice, unlike Boris, who does not get the full leadership debuffage from a Griffin. You do get Hold the Line, but this is comparable to every other Griffin mounted lord, so that's not really a huge boost there. Stand your ground, okay ability, but really you're not bringing a lord for that. Sure, he's got self-sustain with Charm Shield and Rune Fang, Foe Seekers, whatever, but Charm Shield and Rune Fang are nice. But ultimately, do you want to give up those debuffs? Do you want to give up that free self-sustain with Boris, where you can just regen your HP constantly? And Boris is really the closest comparison. And if you want to snipe enemy lords, you're going to bring Carl, because there's none better. Carl with Gul Maraz, even if you don't bring the Reichland Runefang on top of Gul Maraz, is just a beast. He can clock people over the head and do huge amounts of damage. Now, what can be done to improve the General of the Empire, besides simply making him dirt cheap to the point that he's basically OP for the cost? I'd personally like him made into more of a command. In my opinion, Empire officers and Empire heroes or lords should largely be support troops. Empire is not a faction about OP individuals carrying the day. It's a faction about faith, gunpowder, and steel. It's about a faction about sort of where drill and discipline and competence and organization overcomes their individual weakness. They're not Bretonnian Grail Knights. We're just OP. Who are basically Space Marines. They're not chosen. They are not the Space Marines of their universe. They're not Swordmasters with hundreds, if not thousands of years of experience. You know, they're not any of these units. They're not born killers like Black Orcs or Saurus. So the Empire has to compensate for this, and they compensate for that with good leadership. So I think giving the General of the Empire some improved auras would be nice. One thing I was kind of dabbling with as a potential buff to both the General of the Empire as well as a Captain would be a temporary route breaking ability. Now, this would need to be a new ability in the game, but something that makes a unit unbreakable for a very short period of time and cancels its route. So it would be like an interesting mechanic, in my opinion, to make them a good support tool for, say, your cavalry. If your cavalry suddenly gets terror routed, big problem for Empire sometimes, you could rally them immediately, prevent them from routing, keep them in the fray a little bit longer. Make the general, give the General of the Empire perhaps an additional aura that perhaps boosts your troops' melee attack. The Runefang's not terrible, but really just doesn't. He's not really that great of a dive character. I really do think that it would be nicer if you instead focused more on buffing and supporting the front line. Perhaps give him if CA wanted to push more towards that sniping characteristic, I think it would be good to give him, say, Deadly Onslaught. Make him a little burstier that way. Granted, at that point he might be even burstier, he might do more damage per hit than Carl, but he still wouldn't have the melee attack that Carl does to really make him a death-dealing monstrosity like that. So perhaps Deadly Onslaught in conjunction with Runefang, though that could be, I'd worry, a little overtuned. You don't want too much alpha damage. You don't want like 1,000 alpha or something hits to be coming in, which you would be coming close to between Runefang and Deadly Onslaught. But I really would but rather than making this guy a better individual combatant, I really would like to see some better AoE buffs or these targeted buffs where you could order units to perform better. Perhaps give him buffs that he could apply to different types of units. Like you could have something that's restricted to missile units, and he can improve a missile unit's damage output. Granted, that might seem more in line for a Huntsman general, but still, you would assume that a General of the Empire knows what he's doing with different types of troops, and you could sort of have him have different orders, sort of like the Imperial Guard in Warhammer 40k. The officers can issue orders to different units and improve their combat characteristics for a turn. So something along those lines, I think, would be cool for the General of the Empire to make him stand out, as well as make him more competitive. And that extends to the Captain. The Captain is actually right now competitive, so don't get me wrong. I'm not singling the Captain out right now for being ineffective. With his full kit, this guy is like costs like 700 on foot. If you strip him down, he costs, I think, 375. He's dirt cheap, a complete budget option. So he's not bad for his cost by any means. So do not get the idea that I think he needs a buff in that sense. But I would like to see him reworked once again to be more of an officer unit. Once again, I'd like to see some more targeted buffs. Make it where he can improve your troops, where you can point and click and make your guys better, rather than simply being a cheap fighter. Because I don't feel that that's what Empire heroes should really be about, in my opinion. It just doesn't fit the lore and the faction as a whole. I think if there should be a fighty hero for Empire, it should probably be a master of a knightly order, not an Empire captain. Also, you could replace a crappy ability like Potion of Foolhardiness or even Sword of Anti-Heroes with these abilities, perhaps to break retreat or to improve a unit's combat stats for a short duration, something along those lines. I think those would be some cool improvements. Dump Sword of Anti-Heroes, dump Potion of Foolhardiness, because they're just kind of crappy. Obviously, this cost that would have to go up with this. I don't think he could be this cheap with being such a buff bot, but it would be cool to see. Would also be a little unique from the Warrior Priest. The Warrior Priest is all about AoE buffs, and in my opinion, he will probably lose the Scroll of Power in a future patch, so he doesn't have that much sustain, but he has to be near targets, whereas the Captain could have some longer distance and buffage. And it would really be cool, in my opinion, to see him act more as an officer rather than as a budget melee fighter. Now that's it for heroes and lords, and with that we're going to move on to infantry. Now in the infantry department, well, there's a few units. One, Flagellants and their Regiment of Renowned Brethren. In my opinion, this unit is mildly overtuned or overcosted. Flagellants, in my opinion, could be closer to 575, maybe in 550 gold. Bring Unbreakable unit. They are very, very niche at the moment. Only in matchups where you want to bring a mass Unbreakable line, but in the vast majority of matchups, you are going to bring the Sigmar Sons before you bring Flagellants. And as a single anchor, you're going to bring Sigmar Sons before Flags every day of the week. In my opinion, you'd have to be just out of your mind to trade Sigmar Sons for Flagellants in a standard Imperial roster. So the only time you bring Flagellants is if you need an extra Unbreakable unit. But in my opinion, you almost never want that as an Empire because it doesn't give you enough width. These guys cost 300 more than Spearmen. And if you want, so they cost double what Spearmen cost. So you can get 2 Spearmen for every Flagellant. Plus, if you want to beat down the enemy front line, a lot of times Chevron up swordsmen are just more efficient than these guys. Sure, these guys do get the benefit of Frenzy, which once the match starts makes them much more powerful than paper stats here would suggest. If we pop things into full speed here, you can see their melee attack spikes to 40, weapon strength to 36. They also do have Strength of the Penitent, which boosts their physical resist and melee defense in melee if they are losing. So certainly this is a potent ability, but ultimately these guys do tend to get mown down. They're expensive to the point that using archers to melt these guys is not cost ineffective. Like if you're using your 350, 500, 600 gold archers to kill off the flagellants, that's a completely worthwhile trade. They have 0 armor, super easy target. Their performance against armor is nothing exceptional. They only have 8 AP, which is, I believe, it's just 1 more than Empire Swordsmen, and they cost 200 more than Empire Swordsmen. You get no shields, no armor. Yes, you're unbreakable, but ultimately I think 25 or 50 gold cheaper would be a nice buff for these guys. Similar situation for Tattersouls. It might even, in my opinion, it might even be worse with the Tattersouls, because while they do have improved stats from vanilla flagellants, keep in mind these guys are being buffed by Hold the Line right now. Tattersouls actually do have 4 more melee defense than flagellants, but if you've got the Tattersouls in play, they're just they cost almost 900 gold. You're not going to bring them over a unit like Greatswords, and certainly not over a unit like Sigmar's Sons, who once again have that versatility. They've got shields, they've got some armor, not great armor, but some armor, decent melee defense, decent sustained combat stats. Tattersouls won't have that. So unless you're really doing a themed army with Volkmar or something, I can't really think of a matchup where I'd bring Tattersouls before I would even bring Flagellants. I just don't think they're worthwhile. And I think cutting their cost by a little bit would be the way to go. Maybe these guys need even more. Maybe these guys need like 25. I think Tattersouls could use 50 or even 75 gold cut. Now, Halberds are kind of the unhappy redheaded stepchild of the Imperial state troops. There's been a whole slew of different buffs to these guys over the years. Price shifts, improvements to melee attack, improvements to I believe they've had improvements to attack speed. Of course, the most recent significant change was giving them expert charge defense, and these guys still see little to no play. The reason for that is, in my opinion, that they just don't deliver what Empire needs. If Empire needs to counter heavily armored large, they don't need halberds. Empire needs, at that point, Empire is going to bring their own heavy cav or guns, which are and to screen those units, you want cheap spears, not an expensive 650 gold halberd. If you want to prevent an enemy heavy charge, especially from from factions like Norscar Beastmen or Orcs, you're gonna bring well, against Orcs you probably won't even try because they've got Wa, so even if they don't get the charge bonus, they're still gonna melt you with the Wa. And against against other factions that are lately armored, you might bring Greatswords. Greatswords with their 95 armor are much more stable than halberds are against something like Savage Orcs or Berserkers or units like that. Greatswords will just trade more efficiently into them. And yeah, sure, they don't have the defense against large, but that's not that much of a concern for Empire. Most of the time, Empire guns dispatch with that, no problem. So it's about defending against infantry or defending against cav. But for getting extra width, you want spears. For holding a line, you want greatswords or some other unit. There's just a variety of cheap holding tools Empire has. The halberds are most expensive, so there's actually been a whole bunch of discussion on the forums about what to do with the halberds. I saw some good pitches. Hero of Rome, I remember, recommended just dropping these guys' cost by like 100 and reducing some of their stats in melee attack and defense. Personally, I think that still wouldn't put them into the competitive spot, even if spears take a nerf, which there's some discussion about, and that might happen. But I'd personally like to see these guys take a huge price cut down to 400, have their stats nerfed appropriately. Especially their melee defense. I'd say their melee defense could drop down to like the mid 30s. Make them essentially like spearmen with AP. Of course, take away their expert charge defense. So that way, halberds would be your AP budget width option, and they'd essentially be competing with spearmen with shields. You either want a shielded front line or an AP front line, or a shielded backline defense or an AP backline defense. And I think there would be more I think there would be more dynamic and more incentive to sort of mix and match or choose different units in that situation, because you know, sometimes if you just want being able to put in a little extra damage with AP, that can be helpful. If your opponent's swarming you with like cheaper heavy cav and your demigryphs can't cover everything, I think a lot of people overestimate how effectively you can cover with, say, demigryphs. It's only 1 or 2 units. You can't cover the entire map with them. Halberds could help in that situation. At the same time, maybe you want shields. So spearmen with shields would have some competition there. And I think that would be, in my opinion, the way to go with halberds. But it is definitely a tough situation for these guys because, yeah, spears are just so cost effective, and on the other end, greatswords are decent enough for crumping infantry, and while more expensive, they're cost effective enough to beat out halberds by far. Which does bring us to the final unit, greatswords. Now, greatswords are decent. They're honestly a relatively well balanced unit. I just think they could use some slight tweaking. I think they're mildly they're a little underperforming. I think it's just a very tiny smidge underperforming. I think something like +5 armor, +1 or 2 melee attack or defense, or otherwise granting them some variant of stubborn would be a nice buff without making them overtuned. Keep in mind these guys do lose to Graveguard Great Weapons right now, for example, which is kind of crazy given that Graveguard Great Weapons pay the elite the undead tax. So that's pretty nuts that the greatswords lose that fight. They don't trade super effectively into a lot of units that are chevroned up into their price range. I think giving them, say, if they got a little bit more melee attack or a tiny bit more armor, that could give them a little more versatility, a little more staying power. Otherwise, giving them some version of stubborn. Now, I've seen pitches like when they're below half HP, give them immunity psychology. I think that would be OP without a significant price hike, but I think something like, for example, +4 or even +8 leadership when they drop below 50% HP would be nice. Keep in mind, immunity psychology also protects you, I believe, from friendly units routing, so you're not influenced by friendly units running away, and so you don't necessarily want that. But I think with an extra 4 or 8 leadership, greatswords would hold a little bit longer when the rest of the Empire battle line collapses. Because one of the things you gotta keep, for a faction like Bretonnia, for example, due to the fact that all their trash infantry is expendable, their more quote-unquote elite infantry can hold better because they're not influenced by the the routers. So I think that could, but I do think that while I don't necessarily want that buff, I think giving them an extra leadership bit when they're dropping below 50% HP could be nice. Make them stick around a little longer. Means you can get a little more oomph. Oftentimes, just being able to get all your damage out of a unit before it dies, or more of your damage out of a unit before it dies, even if not necessarily efficient, can be a good change, and I would like to see that. Now, for ranged units, we've got quite a lineup here. First of all, archers and their Regiment of Renown variant, the Deathjacks. Now, I will say, I don't think archers are bad. They're actually probably underpriced for the performance they deliver. But I do think they could use some tweaks. I'd like to see them altered. I think giving them a price hike, an extra, say, 50 gold, and more range, up to like 140, would be a nice buff. Deathjacks, I would also like to see get a significant range buff, because right now these guys really, in my opinion, do not perform. There's very few, if any, situations where you just take Deathjacks over Huntsman. Snipe is practically worthless on a unit that only has 120 range. Stalk on a unit that only costs 550 is basically worthless, because who cares if these guys live or die? It doesn't matter. Should you get Vanguard deploy, and they do cost 100 less than Huntsman, but given that and yes, they do shoot faster. They shoot pretty quick at 7 seconds. But given that you lose out on AP, you lose out on the bonus for Schlarge, you lose out on range, all those shenanigans from Huntsman really makes these guys very unappealing. So Deathjacks, in my opinion, if there are no changes, need a significant price cut. But I'd much rather see archers revise, take a price hike, and be improved in combat stats. I feel like Empire shouldn't have trash tier archers in the same league as Goblin archers and Ungor raiders. And with the crossbow changes, there's less incentive, I think, to make these archers trash archers. If crossbows were still the same, I think there would be more reason to keep the archers in this state. But because crossbows are now more of a hybrid unit, I think archers could be more like other factions' archers, or somewhere closer to like Tomb King archers. The Deathjacks, yeah, these guys should, in my opinion, have like 160 range. And that would probably make it more decent, because at that point you get some benefit from snipe for such a cheap unit. Even if it was just up to 160 range, that would be good enough in my opinion. But otherwise, yeah, some price cuts, or if there's or even if there's a rework to the archers, the range hike would be nice. That's really my suggestion there. Free Company I think is good, but I would like to see fire on the move given to them. It's stupid that Vampire Coast zombies can shoot on the move, and these guys can't. And I always said this about the Sartosan Free Company, like why the hell can human pistoliers not shoot on the move, or human men with pistols not fire with pistols while moving, and zombies that are like barely shambling along can. It makes no sense, and I don't think I don't think that would be game breaking in any way. But it would be cool if your free company is advancing and your opponent's trying to run away with archers, for example. You can kind of harry them and pressure them more with your free company while they're trying to retreat. I would like to see that implemented. Same thing for Sterling's Revenge. Sterling's Revenge, in my opinion, could also use a slight price cut without any revisions. I like using Sterling's Revenge. I know a lot of people don't like them and think they're underpowered. I don't think they're that bad. I would just like to see them granted. I would just like to see these guys granted a slight price cut, maybe like 25 to 50 gold. But I think they're actually in a pretty decent spot. So I'm not super fond of requesting buffs for these guys, but I know there's quite a sentiment that these guys are not that strong. So that's why they're included here. White Wolves, definitely overpriced. They're kind of like the Empire Shadow Warriors, but you obviously don't have 360 fire, which is kind of an issue. They cost 250 more than Huntsman. Yes, they can defend themselves better. They've got combat stats that are better than Empire Swordsmen, but significantly less HP, less armor. And ultimately, as Empire, you usually have heavy cav that can protect your archers against like hounds and stuff. And paying 250 for these guys when you can just get like an extra unit of spears, really, in most cases, is just not worth it. Plus, Empire's kiting play with these guys is just not that strong. Usually, I've seen most of the usage I've seen of Huntsman, whether by myself or other players, is in a relatively traditional archer manner. You just kind of deploy them inside your box, at which stage their superior combat stats are not as significant because you've got the benefit of backline protection. And that might just be me. Maybe that's just been my experience that I haven't seen them used in a super aggressive manner. Then again, I haven't seen them much at all because they're just a bit overpriced, I think. But those are just my 2 cents there. I do think some price cuts would be in order for these guys. Now, on to War Machines. And, you know, we're actually going to touch on the Hellstorm rocket batteries first. Because I've had a fix that I keep wailing on and keep whining about and keep hating on the fact that it has not been fixed, and that is fix these damn things arc. Hellstorms, despite all the buffs they've received, despite the fact that they get repeated improvements over patch after patch and have a stupidly good potential damage output, remain a pretty crappy unit. And this, perhaps we can even just try to demonstrate why that is in this situation. Do we have a range on these guys? We do. So let's see. We can fire on these. Let's say we fire on these Glade Guard with Hagane tips, and we're gonna watch as this fire goes down. Yeah, there's an Nerve Kernus, whatever. So the Hellstorm's gonna fire soon. Yeah, that one's firing too, and as we can see here, so one of the problems with the Hellstorm, in my opinion, is that it's at low accuracy. Is stacked on top of a relatively flat arc. Unfortunately, there's a mortar wagon, so it's arcing over there. But part of the problem, in my opinion, is the fact that the Hellstorm just has such a flat arc. And that flat arc, as you can see here, so you saw the mortar, and the mortar was arcing through the air almost vertically, and that allows it to hit. But you can see here the Hellstorm rockets are coming in, and look at this angle. So you see this flat arc, that's like what, a 15, 20, something like that degree angle. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have the exact numbers on me, but look at this flat angle. And because of that, of these rockets, let's see how many of these rockets actually connect. There's like 2 that even land in the vicinity of these Glade Guard. The flat arc is an absolute killer on the Hellstorm rocket battery. And this is, there you can see it did make a few connections. So keep in mind, this is like out of 8 projectiles, like 3 connected. And here we're once again going to see that flat arc. And we're going to see those hits hitting the berms, the hits overshooting right over these guys' heads, hitting right behind them. That was like a full volley from the Sunmaker. And it did like half their HP in 3 rockets, granted. But so much of that accuracy is completely wasted. And in a practical game situation where your opponent is not going to bring elites against Empire, and any terrain can mess you up this badly, it's just not worth it. In my opinion, the Hellstorm needs a higher arc. I think it needs like an extra 15 degrees or so of arc. and that would allow it to hit much more consistently when a unit is behind cover, is behind berms, and while you might still not make as many connections per volley because its accuracy is so very bad, you could at least count on some connections rather than, even on a relatively flat map here, with no lumps in the way against these Gladiator. Keep in mind, there's nothing in the way here. You'd at least be able to sort of get a few more connections, get a little bit more damage output on anything except a flat map. Right now, the Hellstorm actually tends to do really well on flat maps because there's no intervening terrain, but because I don't want its accuracy buffed, I don't want it to be able to devastate with every rocket. I just want it to be more consistent on different maps. I would like to see an arc buff provided to the unit. And I think plus 15 to plus 30 degrees. I'm not sure what would be a reasonable number, to be quite honest. I don't know at what point it would become more consistent on flat terrain or on non-flat terrain. I can't say, but slightly better arc would be nice. Just make it more consistent at hitting. So yeah, that's my 2 cents there on the rocket battery and why I hate it. Then we do have the war wagons. The mortar is here, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. I actually like this unit. I think it's decent at this stage. I know Turin recently put it in one of his videos about the worst Empire units. I vehemently disagree. I don't think it's a great unit, but it is not by far the worst, even Empire unit. I think another 25 to 50 gold could be shaved off its cost, but I was using it a little bit even before it got buffed, before it got that 100 gold buff, and I think that another 25 to 50 would probably put this guy in a good spot. Honestly, the War Wagon is just not bad. It can deliver decent firepower. Being able to move around is important. You're not going to get knocked out immediately by like some Hounds or Lean Reavers getting on you, because you've got good enough leadership and good enough armor to tank through a little bit. Yes, you do give up some backline protection because you lose like a spear unit for these guys, but I like the mobility. I really do, and I think these guys are not bad. Now War Wagons are another story. These guys are garbage, in my opinion. They have 2/3 of the overall damage output of Outriders. They don't even have a fraction of the volley of the burst power. Keep in mind that while that 200 ammo looks insane, that is 200 ammo per wagon, and it's not 200 ammo per gunner in the wagon. It is 200 ammo per wagon. So, assuming all six gunners are firing in the wagon, you're going to burn through that ammo relatively quickly. But it's incredibly hard to direct that fire. You can't necessarily get shooting on the targets you want to be shooting. You can't necessarily focus specific units down very efficiently. And the 360 fire just doesn't matter when you're so freaking slow. Outriders, sure, they don't have armor. They've got they don't have necessarily that high mass, but the fact they've got good mobility and the fact they've got actually a little bit more HP is just more significant than the War Wagon's perks. It's just a dog crap unit. This unit is not worth more than 650 in my opinion. It's like a 600 gold unit that's jacked up for reasons unknown to 900. Now, there's a few ways this could be changed. Personally, I would like to see it buffed more in the Chariot vein. It's a lighter vehicle. It's not carrying heavy mortar, so I would like to see it given slightly more mobility, bump it up to like 60 speed. I don't want that done for other wagons because I think that could get abusive, but with these guys it's not going to, I don't think. So you can bump their speed up to like 60, bump their ammo up to 250. That would make them closer to overall damage output to an Outrider unit without actually quite matching them. And then give them an actual bonus versus infantry. Give them like, I don't know, their stats are really freaking bad, so I'd probably give them like a 15 or so bonus versus infantry. It's a big old wagon. Yeah, sure, it doesn't have size, but if you get like guys with pole arms in there, even though it should, based on the tabletop model. But if you get run over by this or you get trampled by these horses, you're probably going to have a bad day. So I would say give it like a 10 to 14 bonus versus large, something like that. Or bonus versus infantry, sorry. Make it a more competitive chariot. Make it like a true hybrid unit, closer to like a Tyrannok, rather make it a more shooty but less mobile and slightly less competitive versus infantry Tyrannok, essentially. And I think that would be a better way to go with the War Wagon. Otherwise, just cut its price down to like 600 because that's where it belongs, price-wise. It's just not a good unit. And even at 600, you'd never bring these, but at least then they'd be kind of fairly priced. And last but not least, the meme tank. And I've done an entire video on why I think this unit needs to be buffed and how I think it should be buffed. And I know some people insist it is good. And it's been getting steady buffs every patch, though it's always borderline meaningless buffs like +2 melee attack. The steam tank, in my opinion, just sucks. Still. You get 2/3 of a cannon battery, essentially, and a chariot combined. The problem is that at any one point in the battle, you're only getting value out of one of those things, not both. And it's, while yes, it's unbreakable, and yes, it's difficult to kill for non-AP units, and it does tend to stagger lords, in fact. You're almost always going to be fighting a battle down a significant amount of resources until the end game. Now, in the end game, the steam tank can get incredibly abusive, and I know this is one of the big gripes people have. This is one of the reasons people claim it's good. It's because in a late game situation where you've killed off all of your opponent's supporting troops, this unit, or all of your opponent's competitive anti-tank choices, this thing can run shop on infantry for days, much more effectively than even cavalry can. The problem is that in all the time leading up to it, you're essentially fighting somewhere between 800 and 1400 gold down in cost. You are not that, or even it's really freaking. It's the unit is like it's like a 600 gold unit slapped on alongside a 1200 gold unit or so, or maybe 1400. Let's give it the benefit of the doubt there and say 1400. And while it's very, if it was either of those costs and just one of those things, if you didn't have the cannon and it was just a chariot like a Doom Mill, it would probably be good. As it stands, this unit just doesn't, in my opinion, cut the mustard, especially for 2200. And I know there's always, especially I know some like high elf players and whatnot say it's good because but it's supposedly tough to shut down. But honestly, if you bring the tools to counter Empire Heavy Cav, you have the tools to counter Steam Tank. It is essentially, it's a beefy chariot. But it's only got 10 melee defense. All of its survivability is armor and HP, and being kind of small. So if you bring anti-large, this guy goes down pretty hard. Can't fight too great in melee against large targets himself. So units like nobles, heavy cav, even a unit like Silverhelms can put a serious dent in a steam tank. And they're not a specialized anti-large cav. They're not even a particularly great medium cav or medium counts cav. They'll do quite the number on a steam tank, even if it gets some shots into them. So besides just dropping down its price, at which point I'd really be worrying about it getting too abusive, I'd like to see it get some buffs to at least have a slightly more dedicated role. I think perhaps giving its steam gun either a steam explosion like it has in the Regiment of Renown version has in the campaign, or making the steam gun a breath weapon perhaps could be nice. Make it a little better at clearing out infantry and chaff, which it's already good at. So make it a little more honed as an infantry disposal unit without overtuning it against cavalry and its counters, AP missiles or those units. Perhaps removing its vigor loss when shooting, because this tends to cripple the tank a lot. After a few shots, it drops down to very tired and exhausted, at which point its armor drops from 160 to about 120 if actual armor. So one of these sorts of buffs, in my opinion, would be the way to go with the steam tank, would be to make it more competitive. The steam tank loses, I think, almost 50 armor, or about 50 armor when it's exhausted. So it drops it drops like a brick. And I think, and at very tired, it's sitting at like 120 armor. So it's much less effective as it gets exhausted. I think making immune to vigor loss from shooting would be a good way to go. Not from everything, because I think it shouldn't be allowed to just cycle charge for days on end with no penalty. But the shooting tends to cripple it long before it can engage in melee. Those would really be my main suggestions. I don't want the tank to become too abusive. Otherwise, perhaps give it something. It could be cool to get something like the steam points it had, or sort of different buffs based on steam. Now, this would be sort of toying with variants at that point. But you could have, for example, like 3 modes or like 2 modes that you could toggle with a mouse. One could be like you overclock the engine, get a little bit more speed. Maybe one increases the range on the cannon, and maybe one could increase the damage from the top weapon, something like that. I think there's some cool possibilities that you could do with the steam tank without just cutting its cost. But regardless, I think it needs more of a niche. I would like to see it made into an infantry lawnmower, more so that it can sort of help support your front line, especially early in engagement, more effectively without being too effective against cavalry and things it shouldn't be that effective against. But that's just my 2 cents there. Regardless, that is Empire. We will still be doing a video covering the non-faction-specific units in the future. There's a few of them. Not necessarily crossing the same factions, but there is quite a few. Perhaps the most notable is the Giant. which is actually in a more decent spot now than it used to be. But there's a few in there that will be included in the next video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you disagree with me, feel free to post your comments, critiques, and all that down below, your own thoughts and opinions. I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.